Hi everyone and welcome to Linger Longer with Books. My name's Catherine and in this week's video we're going to be talking about all things Steve Cavanagh. So you'll have seen from my intro that I've been lucky enough to kind of hear Steve speak a few times now over the last couple of years, definitely since the COVID pandemic kind of died down. I think I first heard of Steve during early COVID days when we were all kind of stuck inside and there were lots of authors doing sort of live talks and online kind of webinars and sessions, given that if they had books out about to be published that they were not able to obviously celebrate and launch them in person. So I think that's where I first heard of Steve. Hopefully if you've clicked on this video you're either a fan of Steve's novels or you are at least intrigued to find out a little bit more. So Steve hails from Northern Ireland and he is a former lawyer over there, and he has turned his hand to a set of brilliantly crafted novels, the majority of them featuring Eddie Flynn, who is a very kind of gritty, likeable New York lawyer, and he's got his own kind of really kind of meaty backstory, and he is fully dimensional. So I think a strength of Steve's stories that do feature Eddie is that you kind of feel that you go with Eddie in everything that he's feeling and experiencing. I think the backdrop of New York, for one, is really sort of compelling and kind of a really strong feature of the kind of the driving the plot forward. I think, as we know, New York is hailed as the city that never sleeps, and there's always this kind of underbelly of not knowing what's going to happen, whether that's good or bad. But obviously in Eddie's world he encounters a lot of dodgy characters, often kind of battling against them in the courtroom. So in terms of Steve's books, I believe I currently own them all. Here is a handful of the black paperbacks. I'll go through a few of them to highlight in a second, and then these are my hardback copies that I have. So I'll just maybe chat about the ones that I have read to date. So let's just go take a look at those. So in terms of Steve's kind of earlier novels, it's no surprise that I sort of came to Steve's books later than at the very start of his writing career. So I'm kind of reading them all out to date. I haven't yet read these here, but they are on my TBRs. But I have read the very first book that I read was 50/50. This was published a few years ago now. Let me see. Oh, 2020. So right, obviously in sort of full-blown COVID days. This is really clever. And it's obviously called 50/50, and it is basically between two sisters, and they call police saying, "My dad's dead. My sister Sophia killed him, please send help." And then the other sister calls 911 and says, "My dad's dead, but Alexandra did it." So they're both on trial for their dad's murder, but actually what you then enjoy is the backwards and forwards of who is telling the truth, who isn't. So that was completely gripping, completely original. Steve's writing, I think I've just sort of said it before, is that it just drives you along. It is the ultimate page turner. And this is highly enjoyable. Steve's books I do recommend to friends and family a lot. I've recommended to strangers when I've been at Capital Crime, people that haven't yet heard of him. So that was a fantastic one. One that I then read was 13, which obviously got the strap line here, the serial killer isn't on trial, he's on the jury. Wow, talk about a chicken in the coop, or whatever that phrase is. So you've got someone who is basically on the inside, ready to sabotage, hasn't got any good intentions. He's going to devastate, manipulate, sabotage anything he can. He or she, I'm just saying he. And this is a real kind of clock ticking, really quite high pressurized situation of are the jurors going to be okay? Are they safe? Who is the killer? So the back says the murder trial of the century is here. A ruthless prosecutor, a brilliant defense lawyer, a defendant with a secret, and a serial killer on the jury. I'm not going to say too much more about it because I really just don't want to spoil these plots. But that is another ultimate page turner. Couldn't put it down. I really hope that this is made into a TV series. I think that would be really, really good on the screen in terms of courtroom drama, kind of what we see, what we don't see, how it would play out kind of on camera would be really, really gripping, I think, for people of all sorts of different ages, all sorts of interests. I think that could be perfect kind of TV series watching. So that's 13. Next up are 3 of Steve's more recent books that have been published. I hope I'm doing this in the right order. The Devil's Advocate. This again has got the catchiest strapline. He's won every trial because he's behind every murder. What I loved about The Devil's Advocate is it's set completely somewhere else. Like I said, I know the strengths of and the kind of the appeal of New York as a backdrop for lots of crime to take place. Like I said, it's the city that never sleeps, daytime, nighttime. There's always something going on, just from viewing people walking past on the street, from apartment buildings. There's always something happening to someone. But this one is literally set in the South. It features Eddie Flynn, so that's fantastic. But it's set in a very, very southern town, so completely different setting, and it basically follows let me see if I can find the blurb for you. A deadly prosecutor, they call him the king of death row. Randall Korn has sent more men to their deaths than any district attorney in the history of the United States. When a young woman, Skylar, is found murdered in Buckstown, Alabama, a corrupt sheriff arrests the last person to see her alive. It doesn't seem to matter to anyone that Andy is innocent. So you do really feel the power of corruption at its full force here, and Eddie Flynn gets into lots of difficult and heightened situations in the South. Who is telling the truth, who isn't, who has got really bad intentions? Can Eddie stay safe and survive? Because the baddies are pretty ruthless and will stop at nothing to convict the man that they want on death row, and they're pretty compulsive about it. So that is The Devil's Advocate. Loved that. Completely whizzed through that, just like I have with those other books of Steve. So that's The Devil's Advocate. Okay, we have Kill for Me, Kill for You. This was last summer's publication from Steve. It doesn't feature Eddie Flynn. It instead features Amanda and Wendy. They're 2 strangers. They supposedly meet as strangers one evening, and they kind of come to an agreement. They both want someone out of their lives for quite understandable reasons, actually, in terms of human nature and kind of emotions and what's driven them to that point. But they realise they can kind of help one another to do those deeds. Whilst they each have quite strong watertight alibis, which is a really interesting kind of moral question, isn't it? Of of if you had that opportunity and that chance, how many people out there would take it in terms of getting away with murder? That is the ultimate question. So the then ensues a few hundred pages. We kind of go on that kind of journey with the two women. Who quite are they? Are they both telling the truth? They've made this massive commitment, not knowing much about one another, but are they both going to see it through? And how and why? All of that really develops. So yeah, that doesn't feature Eddie Flynn. That's a highly enjoyable standalone from Steve. That is Kill for Me, Kill for You. One thing that I would say about Steve's writing and his really sort of skillful writing is, for me, like I said, I've read many of these out of order, and that doesn't seem to kind of damage my understanding of Eddie Flynn's world and those characters in his kind of nearest network and his circle, which I think is a real art, that you've got enough detail threaded through each of the novels about Eddie's kind of backstory and who he is and his kind of qualities and his kind of strengths and weaknesses, it's enough to carry you through if you didn't read from the start or you're reading the stories out of order. But on the other hand, that if you are a loyal fan from the very start, that, like I said, it's a real art to not kind of over egg the pudding and not have to kind of thread through all of the detail all of the time in all of the books, if that makes sense. That you don't take people's knowledge of Eddie and his world for granted. So basically there's enough information about him that it's a fine balancing act, I think. Not too little information, but not too much on kind of whichever side that you're coming from. Last but not least, I have just bought Steve's very latest novel, which is Witness 8. This sounds completely gripping. I'm just going to read a little blurb to you. I've just started reading it. So Ruby Johnson is a nanny and maid to wealthy families in Manhattan's West 74th Street. She knows their routines, their secrets. One night on her way home, Ruby witnesses a neighbour's murder. She knows the victim, she knows the killer. She makes an anonymous call to the police and names the murderer. But Ruby didn't tell the truth because there's something wrong with Ruby Johnson. Eddie Flynn, conman turned trial lawyer, must defend an innocent man accused of this terrible crime. As Ruby's deadly game begins, one thing is certain: it won't be the last murder this witness is involved in. So again, it just grabs you straight away, doesn't it? That premise, that someone who witnesses a murder and knows who's done it is really twisted. Why has she framed an innocent person? What is going on in Ruby's head? What is her background? What's her motivation for that? So again, set in New York, murder has just been committed. I think I'm a chapter or two in. It's just been committed under the cover of darkness in someone's very kind of affluent neighborhood in their home. So yeah, I shall report back soon about my thoughts on that. But it was great to see Steve the other evening at my local Waterstones in West Quay and Southampton. He was there doing a talk and a signing, so I'm lucky enough to have this copy signed by Steve. Many of my copies are now fortunate enough to be signed by Steve. He is the author I've probably seen the most in terms of live events. If I can make his talks, I always will, because I really kind of admire his writing, given that he openly admits that he has kind of the idea of a plot, but doesn't then plan in any sort of meticulous detail. He just goes with his kind of gut and how he feels. So that is really remarkable in terms of whether authors out there are plotters or pantsers. I wouldn't say at all that Steve is a pantser. He is just really, really skilled in his writing, and obviously he's got his legal background to really kind of pit good against evil, against one another. Obviously he hasn't practiced in New York as a lawyer, but I know that he deliberately removes Belfast from his stories and places them in New York, as well as where we've seen with The Devil's Advocate, the South as well. So if you haven't read any of Steve's stories, hopefully this has encouraged you to pick up some of Steve's books. Like I said, I've still got a few to read from the earlier chunk of his published stories, so I will be getting to those as soon as possible. I am a fan, like I've said. I have got many of my friends and family kind of hooked on Steve's writings now. I think he is one of the best crime thriller writers out there of our kind of generation, and I highly recommend you picking up some of his books very soon. But thank you for watching. I really appreciate you taking the time to join me on this video. If you have watched this far, I think in honour of Eddie being as kind of complex and multi-layered as he is, and that we do find him a lot in the courtrooms, if you leave me the justice scales emoji in the chat to this video, I'll know that you're there. If you are a fan of Steve's books, please leave a comment about which, if you've got a favourite of his. I don't know which is my favourite, actually. This is high up there. I think 13 has to be very high up there as well for me. But yeah, I would say those two if I had to pick. I can't just pick one, it's impossible. But I think these two for me are really high up there. So yeah, just let me know what your thoughts are on Steve's books, and I very much thank you for joining me. I hope you join me next time for more kind of bookish updates and shenanigans. I'm not quite sure what next week's topic will be, but we shall see. But I hope you have a lovely week of not just weekend, week of reading ahead of you. I hope you find some downtime to enjoy a few pages or a few chapters, whether you listen to audiobooks or actually have a physical hardback, paperback in your hand. But until next time, thank you and take care.